Well, you know, over the years there have been many people, Phil, on radio and television who have taken on a specific identity in the game and worked at it successfully for many years. Bill Collins is somewhat different because he not only took on racing, called it his own in Melbourne and Australia-wide, but did variety shows, radio, television, the works. And we welcome Bill online tonight. Good evening, Bill.
G'day, Bruce. How are you?
Thanks for joining us tonight, old friend.
My pleasure.
What do you like to be regarded as, one of our foremost race callers, or one of the pioneers of television, or one of the trailblazers on radio? What gives you most pleasure, Bill?
Oh, I don't know, Philip. I'm dashed if I know. It's just a little. It's just one of those things. I suppose I've been involved in lots of things, and I've done my best at them. And one of the things I like to think of is having grown up with television. You know, I appeared in the first day that Channel 7 opened, and it does give me a lot of pleasure to think that I've been involved for so many years.
Tell us about that opening day, Bill.
I don't remember much about it now, to be quite truthful. It was an interesting day. I was I did a 7-minute, or I split a 7-minute sporting segment in the news on Channel 7 with a former director of the Herald and Weekly Times, Harry Gordon, and the director of the sports program told Harry that they were going to open up on him for the first half. He was going to do general sport and then I'd do racing. And they said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to shoot over your shoulder. You'll be typing away at a typewriter, and then we'll give you the cue and you'll look up at the camera and say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is what happened in sport today, sort of business. And Harry forgot to look up, so he kept on typing for about a minute and a half.
Bill, let's go back in your past and tell us where it all began, where your career started.
Well, I guess it started either with 3UL Warragul radio station or probably with 3TR Sale. I was involved with local the football club, etc., and put on some variety shows to try and earn some money for them. And I finished up doing community singing on 3UL, and then I finished up working up at 3TR Sale, doing sport for them and broadcasting races for them.
And did you move to 3DB from there, Bill?
In 3DB, I came down to 3DB in 1953, yes.
Who was there then? I suppose Jeff Cork was there and Peter Surrey.
Oh, Corky was there, and Peter Surrey and Norm Spencer, and Dick Cranbourne, John Stewart, Maury Callard. Dave Worrell was still the manager. He was the original manager of 3DB.
Yeah, Martha Gardner's husband.
Martha Gardner's husband, that's right.
And where were the studios? In Flinders Street?
Well, they were right next, yes, they were right next to where the present Herald Sun building is. They were in the old an old building next door to them, and then they were through where what was known now as the Herald Dock, where the trucks go in to pick up the papers. The studios were there.
Bill, have a little listen to this, and we'll get your reflections after it.
Joining now, get your blues on the run. We've got fun, we've got laughter, we've got joy.
Well, it was mandatory listening in our home on a Monday night to tune into 3DB for the Happy Gang. Were they happy days for you, Bill Collins?
Oh, very happy days indeed. They were a great bunch of people to be involved with. Dick Cranbourne and John Stewart, of course, were starring in the show. Maury Callard was there, and I joined them, and later on Ernie Sigley came into it, and Jack Perry, and of course Lou Tapano and Mari Parker were involved in it, and they were very happy days because that show went for an hour and a half with a live audience, and people got up to all sorts of tricks, and it was really fun. A lot of it, you made up as you went along. You had a rough format, and you made it up as you went along. And we used to also do those calls for people to come in with crazy things and bring them into the studio.
That's right.
This was on a Monday night on DB, wasn't it, Bill?
Monday night, Philip, yep.
And would you still do the show even if there wasn't a test series on?
That's how it originated, you see, out of the test series.
With Rickety Kate.
Rickety Kate and Eric Welsh used to do the cricket broadcasts from cables that he got from England, And Eric would, we'd do an item or a couple of items, and then Eric would come in and he'd have a couple of cables there, and he'd describe how Lindsay Hassett or Don Bradman had faced up the first ball from, Truman and turned it round a leg and scored one run or something, and he'd be tapping the table with his pencil. I don't know whether he originated that or whether he picked it up from the ABC. Charles Moses, I've got an idea he took it from them. But Happy Gang grew out of that. It was so popular, Rickety Kate, although there was a doll, we had a doll called Rickety Kate, and she was at the back of the artist. The audience could see her, and whenever a wicket fell, her eyes lit up. And it used to frighten the billio out of some of the artists who were in the middle of a song or playing the violin or something, and and everybody started to roar in the audience.
Bill, I'm trying to remember the sponsors of the Happy Gang. Was it in fact Stonyfell Wines?
Stonyfell Wines, Rober.
Yes.
I think Presavine.
Presavine.
So even when there wasn't, cricket on, the Happy Gang continued nonetheless.
Yes, well, the Happy Gang grew out of the cricket broadcast, the variety program with the cricket broadcast, and then it was so popular it became Happy Gang and was on every Monday night.
And would I be right in saying that Sunny Side Up sort of grew out of the Happy Gang?
Yes, Bruce, it was. You're quite right. Actually, the Happy Gang went first onto Channel 7. But after about 3 or 4 weeks, it was found that it didn't quite work. And so the Happy Gang finished, and they formed under Alf Spargo, they formed a new variety show called Sunny Side Up, of which I was fortunate enough to be the compere.
I spoke only last night to Jan Gash, who was doing makeup for you in those days, Bill. She sends her regards to you.
Oh, lovely.
How about a roll call of some of the stars of Sunny Side Up?
Well, Shirlene Clancy, Val Ruff, Billy Fowler, Neil Williams. Of course, the comedy team was Sid Halen and Honest John Gilbert and Val and Maury Fields. And Sid Hollister used to do the female impersonation over the fence with me. You could go on and on. Olivia Newton-John made a couple of appearances in the show, of course.
How many years did it run for?
It ran for about 8 years. It ran the first time, it ran for about 6.5 years. And then it was taken off because of, we had an economic problem. Who wants to talk about that? But at the time we had one, and it was the dearest show on Channel 7. It used to cost $3,000 a week to put that show on.
Including your salary, Bill Collins?
Well, my salary was £40.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back in time again, Bill, to find out where the racing part of your life commenced.
Right. Well, my father, I came from Gippsland up in Maui, and my father was a registered bookmaker, a very small-time bookmaker, and I used to clerk for him. And that's how I got an interest, first of all, in racing. But I became fascinated with two men in particular. One was Eric Welsh, who had the greatest voice I've ever heard, and I'm not talking about racing now. He had the greatest voice I've ever heard on radio. And the other was Jim Carroll, who used to broadcast for the ABC. He had a whiplash type of voice, and they fascinated me with their ability to not only be able to recognise horses by colours, but to be able to put everything together and broadcast a race. So I started doing this with matches and marbles and goodness knows what from when I was about 10 years of age. I used to send matches down the gutter and marbles down the kitchen table with a couple of Havelock tobacco tins, log cabin under 2 legs at the end.
Yeah, well, how do you train to be a race caller, Bill?
Well, that was how I was training. I had a stable at one stage of about 100 marbles, all slightly different, and they all had different names. And you sort of learnt from the colours, you learnt to name them, and from listening to people like Eric Welsh and Jim Carroll, you sort of put it all together.
And when was your first call and where?
It was a little place called Lindenow, Bruce, way up the other side of Bairnsdale. And I forget what year it was now, but I'm 63 and I was about 14 at the time, and the commentator, a fellow by the name of Alf Gaines, didn't turn up. So after about 3 races, my father volunteered me to do the rest of the program, and they propped me up on top of the bar, and I called the last 3 races on the program for them on course, and I did a good job. There was only 2 in one and 3 in the other 2. So I wasn't very happy.
Is that when you became known as the accurate one?
Oh, it might have been, Philip. But from then on, I was offered jobs at other places, and eventually I was taken on full-time at 3TR Sale. as firstly as a racing commentator and then as a breakfast announcer and newsreader. And at one stage I did a dual breakfast session up there many, many years ago with Ernie Carroll.
He often remembers those days very affectionately, Bill.
Oh, yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Ernie was also 3GL there at one time.
Ernie was?
Yes.
Yes, indeed he was.
With Craig Kelly, among others.
Yeah, that's right.
How many Melbourne Cups have you called, Bill?
Well, I did 34 in a row, and I thought that was just about enough. So I retired from broadcasting races at that stage. The first one was in 1954, and I did 34 consecutively from then.
Was the thrill always there with every call, Bill, or were some calls sort of very ho-hum, but the Melbourne Cup was more important, or did every race mean a lot to you?
Well, certainly things got a little bit ho-hum in the winter. I must admit to that. You know, when you get heavy tracks and you get very ordinary horses going around, then you are inclined to get a bit ho-hum. But come the spring, you sort of got revitalised, and you know, the spring carnival, and particularly Derby Day at Flemington and the Melbourne Cup, it's really something again. And if your batteries aren't fully charged when those things come around, goodness knows you haven't got much hope in life.
Bill, at perhaps the risk of me sounding a little bit, putting, say, the younger generation down, I don't do that, and I don't intend to do that. But where are the Bill Collins and the Bert Bryants of today? There doesn't seem to be any starring. They may be very competent callers, but they're not the names and the stars of the past.
Well, perhaps, you know, Brian Martin, our chief caller at 3Z, is a very, very good caller. Perhaps there's not the versatility about today as there was in the years gone past, Bruce. And I think that's probably one of the things people perhaps may have marvelled a little bit, that someone could broadcast races and they could also compare a variety show or a television show or even a quiz show.
Yes, you did Jeopardy at one time, didn't you, Bill?
Yes, I did, Philip, that's right. I was involved in Jeopardy.
What was the most...
That's one of the...
Yeah.
They thought, well, fancy him being able to do that and that as well, you know, although it was it was just a natural thing to me and others of my ilk, the Fred Tuppers and that sort of thing, you know, of those days.
Yes.
So
yes,
what was your most thrilling call ever, Bill?
Well, the one that gave me the most thrill, I suppose, was probably my first back in 1954, because... you know, as a kid from the bush, whose ambition from the age of about 9 or 10 or something had been to be a race commentator, to eventually be calling a Melbourne Cup was something right out of the box, and it was won by a very great horse, of course, Rising Fast.
Oh, yes.
And you know, that's one that I will never ever forget. But there have been some very great ones. The Cox played at Moonee Valley the day that Bone Crusher beat Our Waverley Star. You know, they both took off about the 5 furlong post, or 1,000 metres, and they went stride for stride, full pelt for the rest of the trip, and Bone Crusher won it in a photo from Our Waverley Star. Well, both the jockeys took off too soon in that race, and so did this particular commentator, who was gasping for breath at the finish.
And what about the calls, if any, Bill, where the horses were just silhouettes in a wet and murky backdrop?
It has happened. It's been very difficult. My hardest call was over in South Africa. I went over there for about 5 different occasions to broadcast their spring carnival, which happens in December, or just after the Victorian spring carnival. And they have some very sudden and violent storms there, as you may be aware, at different times. And this was a straight 6 furlong race at a place called Newmarket, just out of Johannesburg, and there are about 20 runners in it. The Java Handicap, it was called, and you learn your colours when the jockeys come into the mounting yard. That's when you learn them. From there, and then until the horses go to the post, you just keep repeating them all over and over again, you know, as they go down. And the favourite was running in black with a red cap. And they went out, the jockeys were getting on board in the mounting yard, and I was starting to learn them, and suddenly they all started to rain a bit, and they all dived inside, and they all came out, the jockeys, wearing black Macintoshes, which Now, about 6 or 7 of the horses in the race had red caps, so there were 6 or 7 horses going down to the post, all wearing exactly the same colours as the favourite in the race. And it was quite a nightmare because they wore the Macintoshes into the starting stalls and then took them off just before they went. So it was one of those old BBB calls, you know, bull dust baffles sort of bit.
Bill Collins, I suppose you've had to do a call in the fog in the past too, have you?
Yeah, that's happened quite a bit, particularly I can remember at the showgrounds. It's happened quite a few times at the old showgrounds trotting, where you know, horses, you can only see them from about 50 metres each lap when they go round, and it is a bit of a problem. You've got to just keep talking, Philip, and making things up perhaps until they come into view again. But it is nightmarish.
We couldn't let you go without memories of Mary Hardy and the Penthouse Show, Bill.
I've got some wonderful memories of Mary. Firstly, as I used to be the caller out at the harness racing. And first of all, it was Mike Williamson and Mary, and Ernie and Mary. And, you know, we used to have a lot of fun from the distance. We were purposely a little bit abrasive towards one another, you know. Mary was always be knocking the trots, and I'd be knocking the things about them that she didn't understand. And then we came together for about 2 years back in the studio. Then I became co-compere with Mary. They were fun days. She was a magnificent artist, and I don't believe Australians or Victorians will ever know how good an artist Mary was. And it was just one of those unfortunate things that there was so little work available in the theatre that at that time that she became so depressed, and it ended up so tragically.
Bill Collins, as you look over your marvellous career, which spans almost 40 years, Bill, wouldn't it, if not longer?
Yes, it would indeed.
What was your very favourite time out of all those years, if there was any?
I think it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
I try not to live in the past. I try to look forward to tomorrow all the time, and I think that my association now, I've changed course completely. As I'm chairman of the Greyhound Control Board of Victoria now, and I'm on the TAB board and on the 3UZ board, and I've been seeing things in a different light because I'm on the other side of the fence, and it's been a great challenge to me, and I'm finding it so interesting, and I just look forward to what the future's bringing.
Would you like to call some more?
No, I've been offered endless opportunities to go and call, and all over Australia, you know, for one race or something, no, I don't want to be involved because, you know, it's just a kick in the pants to nothing.
So what advice would you give people starting out, maybe, you know, following in your footsteps? I mean, I suppose you'd say if they want to be a race caller, go and buy a bag of marbles. But what's the best advice you could give somebody just about to begin and try and emulate your success?
Well, you've got to get away first to a country station. It's no good trying to break in the city because, and it's harder now than it ever was because there's really only one station doing racing now, of course, in each state. The ABC does a little, but here in Melbourne, we've got 3UZ, and there's about one station in each state of Australia that does the racing. So you've got to get away to the country, do a circuit so you can do course broadcasting at the various race courses in the country, get plenty of practice, but always have a second string to your bow. Always be ready to do something else because it's a hard job to break into these days.
Well, Bill, it's been a real delight to talk to you tonight. I know both Phil and I have looked forward to this chat because you sort of sum up us growing up in Melbourne and working with the greats like yourself. They often say that Norman Banks was the one person who could get out and call a football match and then the next day do the 60-minute musicale or the Maya musicale. I believe, Bill Collins, you've done that over the years with your versatility.
Well, we've tried.
And thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Philip.
Great talking to you on Remember When, Bill.
Bye-bye, Bill.